Cold rain fell from a dark sky, soaking the dirt path under her bare feet. The alien girl stood in the middle of the road. Her thin arms wrapped around herself, shivering. Her family walked ahead, their shadows long in the fog, not once turning. To look back at her, she tried to call out, her voice trembling, "Wait for me, please." But no one stopped. Her words were swallowed by the wind, her hope fading with every step they took away from her. She had always been different from the others, her left leg weak since birth. Her body thinner than the rest of her kind. They had called her a burden, a mouth to feed without strength to work. Now, they had proved it, leaving her behind in the middle of nowhere. Her eyes blurred with tears, mixing with the cold rain on her cheeks. She stumbled toward the edge of the road, her body heavy from hunger in the distance. The fog swallowed the last glimpse of her family. She fell to her knees, mud clinging to her skin. For a long moment, she simply knelt there. The sound of rain filling the silence. She thought of the nights she had spent trying to prove herself, carrying water jars, picking herbs, doing anything to be useful, but no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Her hands trembled as she crawled to the side of the path. A crumbling stone wall gave her some shelter from the wind. She pulled her legs close, resting her chin on her knees. Darkness was falling fast, and the air grew colder with each passing breath. She knew what night brought in these lands: predators. Hungry and silent, she told herself she would not make it until morning. A strange sound broke through the rain. Footsteps, heavy and steady, splashing in puddles. She held her breath, her heart racing. Shapes moved in the mist, tall and broad. Nothing like the thin frames of her people. Her first thought was of danger. Maybe a predator on 2 legs instead of 4. She pressed herself tighter into the wall, hoping to disappear. The figure stepped closer, and through the rain she saw it clearly. It was not one of her kind. Its skin was different, lighter. Its face partly hidden under a hood. The stranger stopped a few steps away, crouching to look at her. She saw human eyes, steady, sharp, but not cruel. "What happened to you?" the voice asked, deep and rough. She did not answer, only pulled away, expecting him to walk on like the others, but he didn't. Instead, the human removed his coat. Worn but warm-looking. Without asking, he draped it over her shoulders. The sudden warmth shocked her. No one had given her anything without taking something first. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice certain. "You'll freeze before the night's over." She shook her head. I have nowhere to go," he simply replied. "Then come with me." She stared at him, searching for a trap in his words. Why would a human care for her? Her people feared humans, called them unpredictable, dangerous. Yet here was one offering. Help in the middle of the rain. When she didn't move, he gently took her arm and pulled her up. She stumbled, her weak leg aching, but he kept her steady. They began walking. His steps slow so she could keep up. The road ahead was silent except for the rain. Every few moments, she looked over her shoulder. In the shifting fog, she thought she saw movement, a shadow slipping from tree to tree. Her grip on the coat tightened. "Something's following us," she whispered. The human glanced back, his jaw tightening. "I know," he said, his tone calm but watchful. She felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. They walked on the sound of the shadow behind them, never far. She didn't know if she could trust this human. She didn't even know if she could make it to wherever he was taking her. But in that moment, between the fear of the shadow and the cold of the rain, she realized one thing. He was the only one who hadn't turned his back on her. And for the first time since being left behind, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she might survive the night. The rain kept falling as they walked. The cold air biting through her thin skin, every step was slow, her weak leg dragging in the mud. But the human did not hurry her. He carried most of her weight without complaint. His arm firm and steady. The shadow in the fog still followed, its faint steps matching theirs. She kept glancing over her shoulder, but the figure was always just out of sight. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? What would he want in return? Her people had taught her that humans always wanted something, always made deals that ended badly for the other side. But this man had only given her his coat and his strength, asking for nothing. It made no sense. And that frightened her even more. They turned off the road, following a narrow trail through tall grass. The sound of the shadow's movements grew quieter, as if it were keeping its distance. She felt a small wave of relief, though it did not last. Her legs were numb, her fingers stiff from the cold. The human noticed and stopped. He pulled a small metal flask from his side and handed it to her. "Drink," he said simply. She hesitated, but his gaze was steady. Not forceful, the liquid was warm, burning slightly in her throat. It chased away some of the cold, and she hated to admit it. But she felt better. They walked again. The tall grass gave way to scattered stones and patches of moss. She saw a faint glow ahead, a light in the distance. "That's my shelter," he said, his voice low. The thought of warmth and safety felt unreal after the long, freezing night. But her mistrust still clung to her like the wet clothes on her back. When they reached it, she saw that it was not a normal house. It was made from old metal panels, strange wires running across the outside walls. A large door slid open with a low hum, revealing a warm glow inside. He led her in, the air inside hitting her like a wave, warm, dry, and smelling faintly of cooked food. She stopped just inside the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to step further, but he waved her in, closing the door behind them. The room was filled with things she didn't recognize. Human tools, glowing screens, small machines with blinking lights. It was cluttered, but in a strange way it felt alive. He took the coat from her shoulders and set it near a small heating unit to dry. "Sit," he told her, pointing to a low seat by the wall. She obeyed, still watching him carefully. He moved around the room with practiced ease, opening a small container. He poured something into a pot and set it on the heat. Soon, the smell of food filled the space. Her stomach growled loudly, and she flushed with embarrassment. The human only glanced at her and gave the smallest hint of a smile. "You can eat here," he said, placing a steaming bowl in front of her. She stared at it, her hands hovering uncertainly. Her people had always warned her about human food, but the smell was too much to resist. She took a cautious bite, then another, and soon the bowl was empty. He didn't comment, only refilled it once before sitting down himself. For a while, they ate in silence. She thought about asking his name, but the words felt heavy on her tongue. Finally, she asked, "Why did you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because you needed it." It was such a simple answer that she almost laughed. But there was no mockery in his tone, only truth. She wanted to believe him. But a lifetime of distrust could not be erased in one night. Still, she could not deny that she felt safer here than anywhere else she had been. Her eyes drifted to the door. The shadow outside came back to her mind, the sound of its steps in the fog. "Something was following us," she whispered. The human nodded, his expression hardening. "I know," he said quietly, "and it's still out there." Her heart skipped a beat. Then, "It will come here," she said, her voice trembling. He stood up, walking to a wall where a long, sleek weapon hung. "It might," he said, "but if it does, it will regret it." He moved to the door, peering through a small opening. The wind howled outside, and for a moment, all was silent. Then, faintly, the sound of claws scraping against metal echoed through the night. The human turned to her, his voice low but steady. "Stay inside, no matter what happens." Before she could reply, he stepped outside into the storm. She sat frozen, her eyes on the door, and somewhere in the darkness, something growled, deep and hungry. The moment the humans stepped outside, the air in the shelter seemed to grow colder. The alien girl sat perfectly still, her hands clutching the edge of the seat. The distant growl still echoed in her mind, each sound sharper than the last. Rain. Tapped against the metal walls, the wind whistled through the cracks. She could hear his footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, crunching against the wet ground. Her eyes drifted to the weapon rack. A row of human tools made for survival. She did not understand most of them, but the shapes were enough to know they were dangerous. Her people had always told her humans were violent creatures, quick to fight, but now she was hoping that those warnings were true. Because whatever was outside, it was not going to be scared away by words. The minutes stretched endlessly. She leaned forward, straining to hear beyond the sound of rain. For a while there was nothing. Then came the sound, a sharp thud. Against the metal wall, she flinched, her breath catching in her throat. Something scraped along the outside, claws dragging against the panels. It was circling the shelter, slow and patient. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him to come back inside. But fear froze the words in her chest. Instead, she slid off the seat, her bare feet silent against the floor. She moved closer to the door, pressing her ear against the cold surface. Muffled voices, or maybe just the storm, reached her. Then, another thud, heavier than the first, shaking the wall. A flash of movement outside the narrow viewing slit caught her eye. She could see the human now, standing in the rain. Weapon raised, his body was tense. His eyes locked on something just out of her view. She could see his lips move, muttering something she could not hear. Then it appeared, the shadow that had been following them. It was huge, its long frame covered in wet, matted fur. Its teeth glinting under the faint light. The creature lowered its head and growled. The sound deep enough to rattle her bones. The human did not back away. For a moment they stood frozen, predator and man, rain pouring between them. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the creature lunged. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The human rolled to the side, the creature's claws missing him. By inches, he came up on one knee, firing the weapon. The sound deafening inside the small shelter. The flash of light from the weapon lit up the night. The creature roared in pain, but did not fall. It charged again, forcing the human to dive. Away, the sound of their struggle echoed through the walls. Heavy footsteps and sharp impacts against the ground. The girl's fear grew with every second. She could see him fighting, but she also saw the way he stumbled. The way his breathing grew heavier. Her instincts told her to stay inside, just as he had ordered, but another voice in her mind whispered that if he fell, the creature would come for her next. She looked around desperately for anything she could use. Her eyes landed on a small metal rod near the wall. She grabbed it, the weight almost too much for her thin arms. Her legs shook as she stepped to the door. She hesitated only a moment. Before pushing it open, cold rain hit her instantly. Blinding her for a second, she saw them, the human pinned under the creature. Claws digging into the mud around him. He was holding it back with sheer strength, but he was losing, without thinking. She screamed, swinging the rod with all her might. The metal connected with the creature's side. It yelped, turning its head toward her, its glowing eyes locking onto her small frame. Fear burned through her, but she held her ground. The distraction was enough. The human rolled free. Grabbing his weapon, he fired again, the shot striking the creature in the chest. This time it stumbled back, snarling before retreating into the shadows of the storm. The two of them stood there in the rain, breathing hard. Her hands still clutched the rod, her knuckles white. The human looked at her, his face unreadable. "I told you to stay inside," he said finally, his voice low. She lowered her eyes, feeling the heat of shame and fear in her chest. But then, his voice softened. "You also saved my life," he added, almost reluctantly, for the first time since meeting him. She felt a flicker of pride. They stepped back inside, the door sliding shut behind them. But even as the warmth of the shelter wrapped around her again, she knew this wasn't over. Whatever that creature was, it would be back, and next time. It might not come alone. The rain slowed by midnight. Up. But the wind outside still howled like a wounded animal. Inside the shelter, the air was warm. Yet neither the human nor the alien girl could truly rest. She sat on the low seat, her knees pulled close, watching him move about the room. He checked the weapon, replaced small glowing capsules inside it, and kept glancing toward the door. The sound of the earlier fight still echoed in her head. The roar, the gunfire, the feeling of cold rain on her skin. "You should sleep," he told her without looking up. She shook her head. "If I sleep, it might come back." He gave a faint smirk. "That's why I'm staying awake." But she could see it in his face. He was tired too, the lines under his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought she wasn't looking. The shelter was quiet except for the faint hum of machines. In the silence, she heard her own heartbeat. Steady but fast. She wished she could stop thinking about the creature. The way its eyes had glowed in the dark, the weight of its presence. She had never seen anything so big move so silently. A sudden sound broke her thoughts. A faint scrape outside. She froze, looking at him. He had heard it too, his eyes narrowing as he reached for the weapon. "Stay here," he said firmly, but she didn't answer. The scraping grew louder, circling the shelter like before. Then came a low growl. This time deeper, as if more than one throat made it. The girl's hands tightened around the coat he had given her earlier. She whispered, "There's more than one." He didn't respond, but his jaw tightened the next moment. A loud bang shook the wall. Something heavy had slammed into it, hard enough to make the metal groan. Lights on the walls flickered. A soft alarm beeped in the corner. The creatures had come back. And they weren't playing anymore. He moved toward the door, sliding open a narrow panel to peer out through the slit. She saw dark shapes moving in the rain, their eyes glowing like embers. 1, 2, 3. Her stomach dropped. "They're testing the walls," he muttered. She didn't need him to explain. The creatures were smart. Too smart. Suddenly, one leaped onto the side of the shelter, claws screeching against the metal. Another slammed into the opposite wall, making the structure shudder. He aimed the weapon through the slit and fired, the flash lighting up the rain-soaked night. One shape fell, but the others only grew more aggressive. The growls turned into piercing screeches, a sound that made her bones ache. She backed toward the center of the room, her eyes darting to the windows. The creatures were moving too fast now, their shadows flashing in and out of sight. One landed on the roof, the sound of claws tearing at the panels above. He fired again. This time through the ceiling, a sharp yelp followed, but then came another, closer. Deeper, right above the door. The door shook violently, metal bending inward under the force of repeated blows. "They're going to break in," she cried. He grabbed a second weapon from the wall, tossing it to her. "I know you've never used one, but if they get through, you fire." Her hands trembled as she caught it, the weight foreign in her grip. She had never held anything that could kill, and now her life might depend on it. A deafening crash cut through the storm. The door caved inward. One of the creatures burst through, its massive body filling the entrance. Its fur dripped rainwater, its teeth bared in a snarl. The human fired without hesitation, hitting it in the shoulder. It roared but didn't fall, charging straight at him. The girl stood frozen, the weapon heavy in her hands. The second creature forced its way in, knocking over a small table. The human was too busy with the first to stop it. Her breath came fast, her vision narrowing. The second creature turned toward her, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The recoil jolted her arms. The blast hit the creature in the chest, sending it stumbling back. It roared, the sound shaking the room, but she fired again. This time, the shot burned through its side and it collapsed with a heavy thud. She barely had time to breathe before the first creature slammed the human against the wall. His weapon fell to the floor. Skidding toward her without thinking, she kicked it up toward him. He caught it, spun, and fired point-blank into the creature's head. It fell instantly. The silence after the gunfire almost as loud as the fight. They stood there, breathing hard, the smell of rain and burnt air filling the shelter. Outside, the remaining shapes moved away into the storm, their growls fading into the distance. The human leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She still clutched the weapon, her arms aching. He gave her a single look, not angry, not pleased, but knowing you're not as helpless as they thought, he said quietly. And for the first time, she believed it. The storm had finally passed, but the shelter still smelled of smoke and wet fur. The alien girl stood in the center of the room, her hands shaking. Her eyes locked on the lifeless body of the creature she had shot. Her breath came fast, each inhale tight in her chest. She had never killed before, never thought she could. Yet the proof lay right there on the floor, and the thought made her knees weak. The human moved slowly, picking up the weapons and setting them aside. T was limping slightly, one arm hanging stiff at his side. Blood seeped through a tear in his sleeve, dripping onto the floor. She hurried to him without thinking. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. He shrugged, as if pain was nothing new to him. "I've had worse," he replied. But she could see the tightness around his eyes, the strain in his movements. "Sit," she ordered. Surprising herself with the firmness of her voice, he raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. Lowering himself onto the low seat by the wall, she scanned the shelves for anything she could use. There were strange bottles, rolls of cloth, and a small box filled with human tools. But her mind went to the herbs she had seen earlier when they passed through the forest. Her people had always used them for wounds, and she knew where to find them. "I need to go outside," she said. His head turned sharply. "No," he said, the word final. "You can't. I know where the herbs are," she interrupted, meeting his gaze for a moment. They stared at each other. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." They stepped into the cool, damp air. The ground soft from the rain. The world smelled fresh. But there was still the faint, sharp scent of predators lingering. She moved quickly, scanning the edges of the forest until she found what she was looking for. Small green leaves with purple veins. She knelt, picking them carefully. The human kept watch, his weapon ready. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward her, as if making sure she wouldn't vanish into the trees, back inside. She set the leaves on the table and crushed them into a paste using one of his metal cups. The scent was bitter but clean. She took a strip of cloth and soaked it with the mixture. "Hold still," she told him. He didn't flinch when she pressed it to his arm, though she knew it must sting. His eyes stayed on her face, watching the focus in her movements. "You've done this before," he said quietly. She nodded. "My mother taught me. Before they." Her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. He understood. They stayed silent for a while. The only sound, the faint hum of the heating unit. When she finished tying the cloth in place, he flexed his arm slowly. "It's good," he said simply. She gave a small smile, one that felt strange on her lips after so many days of fear. It wasn't just that she had helped him, it was that he had let her. He leaned back, letting out a long breath. "You were brave tonight," he said, his tone serious. She shook her head. "I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave." He replied, "She thought about that," letting the words sink in. Her people had always treated fear as weakness, but he spoke as if it was normal. As the night wore on, they talked quietly. He told her about his travels, the places he had seen, the people and other species he had met. Some were kind, others dangerous, but he never judged all by the actions of a few. She told him about her village, how she had tried to belong, how she had failed in their eyes. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but never dismissive. It was the first time she felt truly heard. When the conversation faded, silence settled again. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt like a moment where words weren't needed. For the first time since being left behind, she didn't feel like a burden. Instead, she felt like she mattered, at least to one person. That thought kept her warm even more than the heating unit's hum. But outside, in the dark forest beyond the shelter, unseen eyes were watching. Somewhere far off, a low growl rumbled. Not from the predators they had fought, but from something larger. The human's gaze shifted toward the door as if he had heard it too. He didn't say anything, but his hand moved toward the weapon resting by his side. The bond between them had grown. But so had the danger, and both of them knew the real fight was still coming. Asterisk morning came slow, the clouds still heavy in the sky. The air outside was cool, the ground damp from the night's storm. The alien girl stood near the doorway. Watching mist drift between the trees, the human was checking the perimeter. His weapon slung across his back. It almost felt peaceful, but a knot of unease sat heavy in her chest. She didn't know why, but the quiet felt wrong. As if the world was holding its breath before something happened. When the human returned, he noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but alert. She shook her head. "I don't know. It feels like something is coming." He studied her for a moment before nodding slightly. "Instinct is usually right," he said. They had just started preparing food when it happened. The sound of voices carried through the trees. Not just one or two, many, moving together. The words were in her own language, sharp and familiar. Her heart froze, her stomach twisting in knots. She knew those voices. She had grown up hearing them, but never expected to hear them again. "They're from my village," she whispered, her throat tight. The human's eyes narrowed. "The ones who left you." She nodded slowly. Unable to meet his gaze, he moved to the doorway, scanning the tree line. Shapes began to appear, tall, thin figures with long cloaks. Armed with spears and curved blades, they were coming fast, their steps confident when they saw her. Their eyes locked on her like hawks spotting prey. One of the older men stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "You," he said, pointing at her. "You will come with us." Her chest tightened. "Why?" "You left me." The man's expression didn't change. "You are still one of us. And you have no right to be here with an outsider." The human stepped in front of her, his body blocking their view. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. Murmurs rose among the villagers. Another man stepped forward, his tone sharper. "This is none of your concern. Human, hand her over, and we will leave you in peace." The human's voice dropped low. "She's under my protection." The air grew tense. Weapons shifted in hands. Muscles tensed under cloaks. The girl's heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears. They had never wanted her before, never cared if she lived or died, so why now? She looked closer at their faces, and she saw it, not concern, not guilt, but something else, fear. It was hidden under their stern expressions, but it was there. "What do you want with me?" she asked, her voice shaking but loud enough for all to hear. One of the women spat the words, "Because you're cursed." And curses spread. It was the same lie they had always told, the same poison that had justified leaving her. The human's jaw tightened. "Cursed. She's the one who fought to stay alive while you abandoned her. The older man's eyes narrowed. Last warning, human, step aside. Behind him, more villagers began to fan out, circling. The human's hand slid toward his weapon. She knew this was about to turn bad, and then it got worse. From the shadows of the trees came a low, rumbling growl. It froze everyone in place. The sound was deeper than the predators they had fought before. Leaves shook, branches snapped, and something massive moved closer. The girl's stomach dropped. The human glanced at her and saw the fear in her eyes. This was the same presence they had both felt days ago. The villagers' attention shifted, but their formation didn't break. Then, from the mist, a shape emerged larger than a horse. Its body covered in thick, black fur, its head low and eyes glowing red. The predator stepped into the clearing, its breath steaming in the cold morning air. The villagers began shouting, some lifting their weapons, others backing away. The human raised his gun, his stance steady. The predator's eyes scanned the group before locking onto her. Her chest tightened. She could see it wasn't just hunting, it was tracking her. It took a step forward, and the human stepped in front of her again. The villagers, seeing where its focus lay, began shouting at him, "Give her to it. That's what it wants." One man yelled. Her blood ran cold. The human's voice came like steel. "Over my dead body," the predator growled, lowering itself to pounce. The villagers backed away just enough to leave the two of them standing as the target. She could feel the human tense beside her, his finger hovering near the trigger. In that moment, she understood it wasn't the villagers or the predator that would decide her fate. It was the choice she made next, and this time, it would not let someone else decide her worth. The predator's muscles bunched, its claws sinking into the damp earth. The air felt thick, heavy, as if even the wind was holding its breath. The alien girl could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The villagers stood back. There, weapons raised, but their bodies ready to run. The human stayed where he was, his stance solid. Weapon aimed straight at the creature's head. The predator moved first. Launching forward in a blur of black fur and teeth, the human fired. The shot cracking through the morning air. The bullet struck its shoulder, spinning it slightly, but it did not stop. The girl's instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs refused to move. The predator crashed into the human. Knocking him to the ground, his weapon flew from his hands. Skidding into the mud several feet away, the villagers shouted, some yelling for him to get out of the way, others urging him to hand her over. The predator pinned him down, its jaws snapping inches from his face. He fought with all his strength, one hand pushing against its throat, the other trying to reach his knife. The girl's eyes darted to the fallen gun. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She ran through the mud, every step heavy and slow. The predator noticed, its head snapping toward her. She slid to her knees, grabbing the weapon with the weapon with trembling hands. Her finger brushed the trigger. The human saw her and shouted, "Aim for the head." The predator lunged toward her now, leaving him behind. She lifted the weapon, her arms shaking from its weight. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but its glowing red eyes. Then she fired, the recoil nearly knocking her over. The shot hit true. Slamming into the predator's skull, it roared, stumbling back, its claws raking the ground as it struggled to stay upright. The human was already moving, grabbing his knife and charging forward. He struck deep, and with a final shudder, the predator collapsed. The clearing fell silent, except for the sound of rain dripping from the trees. For a moment, no one spoke. The human leaned on his knees, catching his breath. The girl stood frozen, the weapon still in her hands, her chest heaving. Then the villagers began to murmur, their voices low but sharp. Some looked at her with shock, others with something darker. Fear, you see. One of them whispered, She brings danger wherever she goes. Her chest tightened, but this time she didn't look away. She stepped forward, standing beside the human. I didn't bring danger, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her heart. I faced it when all of you would have run. The villagers shifted uncomfortably. Avoiding her gaze, she turned to the older man, the one who had demanded she return. You left me to die, and he, she pointed, to the human chose to save me. The human said nothing. Letting her words stand on their own, the clearing felt heavier now, but it was no longer because of fear. It was the weight of truth. The older man tried to speak, but his words faltered. One by one, the villagers began to step back, their faces pale. They had no claim over her anymore, and deep down, they knew it. Finally, the human spoke. His voice calm but cold. She's not going with you. The villagers hesitated, but none of them dared to challenge him. One by one, they turned and melted back into the misty forest. The girls stood still until their voices faded completely. Only then did she let out a long, shaky breath. The human glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You could have run, he said. She met his eyes. And leave you. Never for a moment, they simply looked at each other. No more words were needed. The choice had already been made. She wasn't going back to the people who had abandoned her. She wasn't going to live in the shadow of their rejection anymore. Her place was here, beside the one person who had seen her worth from the very beginning. He nodded once, as if reading her thoughts. Then, let's go home, he said quietly. They turned toward the shelter, walking side by side. The forest around them still whispered, with hidden dangers, but the fear she had carried for so long felt lighter now. Because this time, she knew she wasn't alone, and whatever came next, they would face it together.